Hey guys, welcome back to another week of box office, some interesting developments, and some new closings, so let's get into it. We have Juliet, 91% last week and 822K. This week, 93% and 861K. I've been kind of going through all the different shows, seeing how they've been doing the past year, and Juliet has had a very solid 2025, with them having their weakest time in May. So January through April, they'd be doing 8s and 9s and a millions, and even in 2024, they were doing pretty good. But what you're starting to see, going back to the fall of 24, is it's starting to fall into the 6s and the 7s. Now again, Juliet has been on Broadway for, I believe, 3 years at this point, because 2022, 2023, 24, 25, so it's been here for 3 years. So you're starting to see what happens to a show as it's slowly dying, and Juliet's starting to do weaker numbers, and that's pure and simply what's happening. However, I think that it's still doing fine enough that I don't see it closing at the end of this year or even next year. I think at the earliest, it could close in January of 2027 or at some point in 2027. Because again, it recouped its investment. I'm gonna estimate that its weekly cost is probably somewhere in the $800,000 area. So it just about made its money this week. But again, I don't think you have anything to be too concerned about, but to say is that it is starting to decline, and you are starting to see these numbers slowly fall. And if you're a fan of Juliet, I wouldn't say go and see it immediately, but maybe don't wait another year and a half, assuming it's still gonna be here. Now again, could it close before this time next year? Yeah, it could. But that doesn't normally happen. These things are a slow-moving death, and right now it's doing 8s and 7s, and next year it'll probably be at like 7s and 6s, and at that point they might decide to close it. And then we have Boop, which is still somehow continuing, 85% last week and 554K, 78% this week and 512K. Again, I don't know how it's still continuing to run, but I feel like it will eventually close at some point. Buena Vista Social Club sells out at, almost sells out at 99% through both weeks, and 1,266,881 last week, and 1,288,995. Cabaret at the Kit Kat Club, 76% last week and 666K. This week, 86% and 762K. Again, not good enough to justify it staying open, so if I were you, I would get tickets if you want to see it. Dead Outlaw had its worst week yet, at 80% last week and 503K, and 69% and 449K. And just to further make this worse, this was the week post Tonys, and people were praising its performance. I thought it was the best one of the night, and it's still doing horrible numbers. I didn't think it was going to get this bad this quickly. Grosses wise, it's pretty consistent, but that capacity with that low ticket price is super concerning, because when you have a low ticket price and you have low capacity, that is a huge problem. Because they could say, well, people are seeing it, it's just they don't want to pay $100. And again, we've gone over this ad nauseum, but Dead Outlaw, despite getting critical acclaim and Tony nominations, didn't win anything. It is such a weird musical that it needs that Best Musical win, proving that this model of these smaller musicals betting on winning Best Musical is not a sustainable nor a smart financial model for shows in the future. And again, Dead Outlaw is not like maybe Happy Ending, where it has a mainstream story and it's sellable. Dead Outlaw is the most unsellable, most un-mainstream show. It's got dark humor, it's very metaphorical, and it plays with the form. It's vignettes instead of a linear story. It's everything general audiences reject. I could see it closing at the end of this month, honestly, or even in July or August. I just don't see how it still is here in December, which is so upsetting because this is such a good show. So if you have not seen Dead Outlaw and you're thinking about it, go and see it. Tickets are obviously very cheap, and you can see that in your big IP show. And again, I think the marketing has been, in my opinion, as good as they can do. They put out tons of videos and music before. They've put out parts of the album. They're releasing like 4-minute clips. They're really selling the show, and it's just not working. It is a case of a little too late, but I also think that the story is such a hard sell that even when people see the Tony numbers or the clips, they're not entirely sold. And it also goes to show how conservative and hesitant general audiences have become to new musicals. And we're seeing very similar things in the indie movie space as well, although it's getting slightly better this year. But I think the main factor is that audiences, majority of them, do not get or like the show. I'd say like 60% hate it. You have maybe, I don't know, like, actually, no, you probably have 50% that do not like it at all, that wouldn't recommend it. You probably have 20% that are in between, and then you have 9 to 19, 30% that like it. That's not great. Death Becomes Her sells out, 99% and 1,347,924. 92% this week and 1,328,949. Floyd Collins, which is closing in 2 weeks, 76% last week and 507K, 79% and 496K. Probably lost money every single week, but I'm happy that it's here. Gypsy, 69% last week and 1,042,786 to 76% and 1,064,455. Again, I think it didn't win any big Tonys. Audra's performance was divisive. I would close it when Audra leaves. HadesTown, 96% last week and 756K. This week, 94% and 730K. If you look at HadesTown's numbers, it's been struggling since 2023. We know this. It would have closed last year if it not for stunt casting. It had a pretty good 2024. As for 2025, January, February, and March were their best months, and they actually did very well without stunt casting. But again, when going over all these grosses as I have done, what I've realized is that these stunt casting temporarily get people to get back into the show, but only for a couple of weeks, and then people go away. And May was their toughest month. You'll see a big sort of reoccurring thing that these longer running shows did really bad in May, and I think that's because there were so many new musicals. I think this was the most amount of new musicals in a single season ever. But again, HadesTown relies on stunt casting. Without stunt casting, they fall to 700K, 600K, and those are not sustainable numbers for HadesTown. Their weekly operating costs are probably around that $680,000 range, so doing 700 to 730K and 600 is not sustainable for HadesTown, and there are rumors that they might close it at the end of the year. I think it's been going for 6 years now. You know, the fact that it's still doing this well after that long is pretty impressive. And even if it does close, it's had an amazing time. I don't want it to close, but just looking at the trends, it seems like without stunt casting, they're at the 7s and the 6s, and they got a year or so reprieve through stunt casting. Because I think without stunt casting, if you look back at 2023's grosses, they would have closed last year. They were doing 5s, 6s. I mean, they were struggling bad. But again, some shows just have a lifespan. They run out of steam, and that's the natural progression of shows. But again, I think HadesTown could definitely be here a year from now, but I wouldn't count on it. I could see it closing in January if there's a new big show that they want. Hell's Kitchen, 83% last week and 884K. This week, 87% and 911K. So Hell's Kitchen is doing great, and I looked at it throughout its, year and a half run, and it's doing pretty great. It definitely has done softer numbers in February and March, but it's still very profitable and has yet to see a 7 in front of it. And again, as long as, Hell's Kitchen and Juliet, HadesTown has an 8 or a 9 in front of it, it's A-okay. Just in Time sells out 1,247,762 last week, and 1,271,350. I mean, people are paying over $200. I mean, it's insane. But clearly, Groff, as I've said before, is a box office draw. and anything he is in, people will come to. Maybe Happy Ending, 102% capacity, and 1,159,543 last week, and 1,236,230 average ticket, 154. We've come such a long way, and it's kind of what I thought. I think next week it'll be 1,300,000, and clearly that Tony win immensely helped Maybe Happy Ending. I think because, again, Maybe Happy Ending is so mainstream, is so marketable. I think it will resurrect to a certain level the best musical brand, because people will see, wow, Maybe Happy Ending was so good and appealed to me, I will maybe take a chance on more new musicals, and it's exactly what we want. I think without Darren, they might go to 1,100,000, but as long as it has a 9 or an 8 in front of it, it's doing fine. I should preface that by saying that it minimum should go to 870, 850K, you know, but I think when Darren leaves, it will have a dent on the box office, but not too much, and I still think it will do 1,000,000. It's not like he's Ben Platt level, like in Dear Evan Hansen, and even during previews, Darren's name didn't really do much, so again, for people concerned about Maybe Happy Ending, post Darren, I don't think we have much to be concerned about. Moulin Rouge is gonna close 91% last week, 880K. This week, 91% and 879K. Show's been struggling. I actually looked at their grosses overall, and 2024 they got Boy George to come in, but they were struggling, even going back as far as 2022 where they were doing low millions, and in 2023 Aaron Tveit came back, but you started to see the cracks of that 2 years ago, and you really saw the cracks of Moulin Rouge in 2025. This is their worst performing year of all time. I honestly don't know if it's going to be here this time next year. It could be if they get another big stunt cast. But if they don't, I don't know. I don't think it will be here this time next year. Mincemeat sells, 99% and 775K. This week, 98% and 763K. Again, I think that as long as it's in the 7s and 8s, it's doing fine, and it's a limited engagement. I could see it falling into the 6s and the 5s, but again, it is kind of a low-budget 6 musical, so it could take that. Although I will say the caveat is that 6 made $1 million plus for a year and a half before falling below 1,000,000, so Mincemeat does have that to worry about, but I think it is commercial enough that I think it can run for at least as long as Something Rotten did. It is more British, and more British imports don't last as long, but Mincemeat has a very dedicated, large fan base that will pay ticket prices, and it seems to attract general audience members, so I do think Mincemeat will have a successful time, and if they don't, they can just say, hey, we were only here until February of 26. Real Women Have Curves. It's closing, guys, end of June. 72% last week, and 414K, 63% and 365K again. I don't think anyone's surprised. I think this was just too competitive of a season. Too many good musicals. Like Groundhog Day, it got left out in the dust and forgotten about. Although I do think even in a less competitive season, I don't see how this show would have won any big awards. And I still think it wouldn't have done great business-wise, because I think it is, when you listen to the music, you look at it, it's not the most interesting plot. It's kind of has that samey feel where it feels like other musicals. And so I feel like Curves was of a different era. You know, I think maybe in 2007, 2008, this could have worked. But I think that ultimately, Curves just didn't manage to find its audience, despite being a very popular play and film. Listen, I saw the poster for this a year ago, and I said, flop. I was right. So all those people are like, Andres, you don't know what you're talking about. Andres, what are you doing? I knew the show was going to flop. I only saw the poster. Because you can just tell. It's an instinct. You have it or you don't, and I have it. Sue me. 6, 72% and 623K. This week, 79% and 678K. 6 definitely is having its worst year yet, but if you look at its overall grosses, it recouped its investment. It had a pretty good 2025 up until like around May, where it was doing 8s and 9s and 7s. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. Obviously, this isn't ideal numbers. It probably lost money last week. But it can survive for, I'd say, at least a year with 6s in front of it. And I do think over the summer it will rebound, and maybe we'll see 5s, but I think this will, again, have a slow death. Smash, there's no doubt, why this is closing, because it did 66% last week and 656K to 68% this week and 576K. Although it did have one less performance, but still would have done horrible. Stranger Things is doing pretty good. 78% last week and 891K. 83% this week and 1,016,176. Stranger Things started off really good and then had a really bad detour, but it seems like that summer box office is kicking in, and with season 5 coming on, hopefully Stranger Things will be able to succeed. And we've gone over it, why it hasn't been doing well, but essentially, you know, there's a lot of people that don't watch Stranger Things, and they have to watch 4 seasons to get to that, and a lot of people just don't want to do that. And they're not marketing it right. And again, I think this is not a 4-quadrant show because it is more scary and dark. And I think there's a lot of, you know, perceptions that it's not that good of a show. And it doesn't necessarily have the spectacle that Harry Potter has that I feel like would make this sell more. Although it does have amazing puppeteering and projections and stuff like that. But I think that's ultimately why it hasn't succeeded. Sunset, with that Tony win, blew up 88% and 1,261,214 to 91% and 1,665,762, and that is limited engagement. It was doing softer numbers. It was doing these numbers kind of consistently until like February and March, but I'm glad it's ending on a high. Book of Mormon, 89% last week and 791K. This week, 91% and 823K. Now, yes, this is Book of Mormon's worst performing year overall, but before May, it was doing pretty good. And again, I think it is losing money, but as long as it's doing 8s and 9s and a millions consistently, which it has been this year, it's fine. And occasional 7s is fine. I think they will try and stunt cast this before they close it. I think it will do well enough in the summer. Maybe we'll fall to a 6 in the fall, but with winter, Christmas, and then post-Christmas and next summer, this will be here next year, and I think at the earliest this closes in 2028. Because again, these numbers are not bad enough to justify a closing. I feel like, again, they'd have to be doing, you know, 7s and 6s consistently, and that could happen over the course of the next year, but I don't think it's gonna close. Gatsby, 90% last week and 1,056,038. This week, 91% and 1,066,300. And again, Gatsby has done great post Jeremy and Eva. It's done great this year, and I think it's going to have many more years to come, even though it's a little bit weaker in May. Last 5 years is the disappointment of the century. 69% last week to 74% this week for 9 performances, and 444K to 480K. And I know, and they had 9 performances, so they did a little bit better. And this show started off with so much promise financially, and even when it started off, it was kind of a little bit underwhelming. Again, I think without Nick Jonas, this show would be doing better. I think, you know, they had to have more faith in the material, but it makes sense that they would want to stunt cast this, considering that it's an off-Broadway musical that premiered over 20 years ago, and every single one of Jason Robert Brown's musicals have failed, except for Parade, which was a revival and a limited engagement. In the last 5 years, is a limited engagement and has a name in Nick Jonas. But again, I think that, you know, Nick is not that talented, so in terms of musicals, and so it purely is that word of mouth was horrible and people just didn't want to pay the ticket prices for it, and that's general audiences. You had the fans of the last 5 years that were just offended by the whole thing. You had critics that didn't like the direction. You had the Nick Jonas fans that said he's going to go on tour at the end of the summer, and I can see him and, you know, laugh and yell and scream and see the Jonas Brothers and not waste my ticket on this show that I don't care about and that Nick doesn't sound so good in. So they really managed to offend every single person and turn off every single person. Nick Jonas is not a box office draw. It's proven with now the last 5 years and with How to Succeed, which you could argue was when he was at his height, and that still did horrible. I really truly believe that if you did this with 2 really good actors in these parts, this would be doing, you know, maybe not 800, 900, a million, but I think it would be doing 6s and 7s consistently and could have turned into another 6-level success story. And even if it wasn't, I think it would have done better, as even if it was a limited engagement, if you had different stars in it, I still think it would have done better. Because it is not a hard story. It's a very sellable story. It's a very marketable story. It's a very mainstream story. It's got very poppy music. Yeah, the concept is hard to understand, but people can get into it. And I think the last 5 years could have been primed to have been a success story that ultimately failed because they chose not to believe in the material. And then The Outsiders sells out, and 1,246,336 this week, compared to last week's 1,216,709. And The Outsiders continues to do amazing 1 year later, because they won Best Musical. I don't think it's ever gone below 1 million at all since it's opened, and even if it didn't win the Tony for Best Musical, it still would have done great. But those are my long-winded thoughts on the Tonys. Like, sub, comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.